So today's Daf Yomi is dedicated to Yeshua for Am Yisrael, Geula for Am Yisrael for the redemption, Hatzalah of the Shvuyim, the Shmira over all of the Chayalim. So today's Daf Yomi, we're going to start on Nun Vav Hamabeis. Today's Daf Yomi is Nun Zayin. We're going to start on Nun Vav Hamabeis around 6 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says, Itmar Shomer Aveda, the person who's watching a lost object, what's his status? What's the status of such a person? Rabbah says, Kishomer Chinam, he's considered like he's a unpaid watchman, and in which case, since he's an unpaid watchman, he's exempt if it's stolen or lost. Rabbah says, Kishomer Chinam Dami. Rav Yosef says, Kishomer Sachar Dami. Yossi says, no, this person is like a paid watchman, in which case he's chayiv, he's liable for Geneva and Aveda. Why? Why is he a Shomer Sachar Dami? Rabbah says, Kishomer Chinam Dami. Rabbah says he's like an unpaid watchman because Bava Kamma. What actual benefit is he getting? He's watching this object, he's not getting paid for it. So he's considered like a Shomer Chinam. Rav Yosef says, Kishomer Sachar Dami. Rav Yosef says he's considered like a Shomer Sachar. Because of the benefit that at that moment, if a poor person would come to him, he wouldn't have to pay the poor person at that moment. So therefore, so therefore that's the benefit. He wouldn't have to give the poor person a piece of bread. Rashi says that osik b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. While you're involved in the mitzvah, you're exempt from the mitzvah. And Rashi says we learn this out b'lachtecha b'derech in Mesechas Sukkah. Tosfos points out that's only at the moment that you're engaged in the mitzvah. Like for example, you're pushing out the carpet for the carpet's benefit. But if otherwise you're not actually doing anything to the product, to the object, then it's not okay. Then you would have to give the bread to the poor. There's some who explain like this, and the Meshech Chochmah says that this is a later addition to the Gemara. But the Rav Yossi says it's like a Shomer Sachar Dami. It's like a Shomer Sachar. You're like a paid watchman. Kimin derachmana shavdei bal korche. Since the Torah says you have to do it, Shomer Sachar Dami. It's like Hashem is paying you. Hashem is giving you the money. So therefore you're getting reward from Shemayim. So therefore you're like a paid worker. So the Gemara is going to bring several examples, several challenges to Rav Yosef or to Rabbah. And the way to remember this, the Gemara gives us a siman, is Ichzira, La'olam, Hashev, Chia, Amris, Nishbar, and Sachar. So Eisvei Rav Yosef or Rabbah. So Rav Yosef, who says you're like a Shomer Sachar, he says to Rabbah, what about the fact that it says in the Tosefta B'Metzia, Chzira Malkum Sheyirena, that if you find the lost object and you return to a place where the owner will see it, Eino Chayev L'Tapel. Once you return to the place where the owner will see it, you're not responsible to deal with it anymore. Nigniva o Avda, but if it was stolen or lost, Chayev B'Achriyusa. You're responsible for it. What does it mean? My nignava avda. What does it mean if it was stolen or lost? Lav nignava mi beso avda mi beso. Doesn't it mean if the person who found it had it stolen or lost from his house and he's not responsible? And that proves he's like a shomer chinam. Therefore, this is a question on Rav. This is a question. It says nignava o avda chayev b'achriyusa. If it's stolen or it's lost, he's going to be responsible for it. And so therefore it's a question on Rabbah, because Rabbah says he's like an unpaid watchman who's exempt from theft. And here we're saying he's responsible if it's stolen. Gemara says, no, mimakom sheikh zira. No, if it was stolen or it was lost from the place he returned it to, then he would be responsible because that was negligence. Basically, it wasn't in his own home. He brought it back to the place. And if it was stolen or lost or there from the place where he dropped it off, then he's going to be responsible because he was negligent. And so therefore, that's how Rabbah would explain it. Gemara says, but how can you adapt that reading of the brisa? But the brisa says specifically he's not responsible to if he returns it to the place where he found it. It says Eino chayav l'tapel ba. So the Gemara says, Amay hachav ma'askino. And here what we're talking about is where we returned it in the afternoon. Vitarati Kitani. There's two aspects to the brisa, two laws being taught. Rachi Kitani. This is what the brisa teaches us. So let's say he returned it in the morning. And by the morning, it means at a time where the owner is commonly there. It's you put it in a place where the owner will likely see it. And it's common that the owner goes in and out at that time. Then Eino chayav tapaba. Then he's not required to engage with it anymore. And we're going to say if he brings it there, he's going to be exempt. That's what Rabba was saying. But let's say you put it back in the afternoon, to a place where if it would be in the morning, the owner would see it. But the lo shliach va'ayo, but the nafik, the lo chazila, there, but since he brought it at a time where the owner doesn't typically go in and out, so therefore the owner's not going to see it. Though let's say it was stolen or lost, then it was negligence, and so chayev. So then we're going to say chayev v'achriyus. Then even Rabbi would say he's responsible because he was negligent. Shomer chinam, an unpaid watchman, is responsible for negligence. Mara says another attempt to challenge that Rav Yosef, who says it's a shomer sacher, challenges Rabbah. It says, the next clause in that brisa says the person who finds it is always responsible until he brings it back to the domain of the person who lost it. What does it mean, my olam? What does it mean he's always responsible? Doesn't it mean lava feel me base? So even if it was taken from his house, don't we see from here that he's like a shomer sacher? Mer says, so isn't this therefore a question on Rabbah? So Rabbah's response is, no, let's talk about what case this is referring to. Mer says, Amarle, Modino that Rabbah would say, I would admit to you that if this was talking about a case of a living animal, of an animal, that under those circumstances, I would say that the owner would have been, that the person who found it would be liable if it was taken out from his house. The kivan denachtilahu, since the nigra briasa by mitirusa yisera, because since with respect to those animals, because since he saw that they typically go out, as animals don't stay in one spot, they move around, he's required to do an extra protection. And even if it would be a shomer chinam, even if it would be an unpaid watchman, he'd be responsible. But in general, Rabbah would say if he was a shomer, if he finds a lost object, he's exempt from theft. But that case was negligence. So now Rabbah turns the table on Rav Yosef. Again, Rabbah says if you find the lost object, we're halfway down on 57a, and we want to compliment you on your haircut, Jeff. Halfway down on 57a. That Rabbah, who says that the one who finds the lost object is like a shomer chinam, challenges Rav Yosef, who says he's like a shomer sacher, he's like a paid watchman. It says in the pasuk, hashev, you have to return the lost object. Hashev tishivim, you must return the lost object. Hashev ainli alababeso, I only know that you have to return it to the owner's house. Liginasul charvasu minayin, says the brisa. How do I know you even return it to his gardens or to his ruins? That you could return it not only to his house, but you're also allowed to take it to his garden or to his ruins. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean you can return it even to his gardens or his ruins? Even you want to say you could drop it off in his locked up garden or his locked up ruins. Well, then functionally that's the exact same place as his house, so there's no distinction there. Now, pshita, so it must be that what we're obviously talking about is leginaso she'ina mishtar merit, that if you find an object, you're even allowed to drop it off in a garden that's not watched, or charbaso she'ina mishtar merit, or to his ruins that's not watched. And so therefore, Shema mina kishomer chinam dami. We see from here that he's like a shomer chinam. That basically you just have to, you're allowed to even drop it off in this not excessive watching. You don't need the higher level of watching that a shomer sachar would typically require. That's the way you have to read the Gemara. Rashi says it's sufficient for him to drop it off in the garden of the owner. So isn't this a challenge to Rav Yosef, who says that if somebody finds a lost object, he's like a shomer sachar? Gemara says no. Rav Yosef would respond, "Oh, maginos mishtameres so charvasa mishtameres." No, it's really referring to the fact that you can only put it back in his garden or his ruins that were guarded. Well, if that's the case, so your basic question is, isn't this the exact same scenario as the first clause of the price, which says that you could drop it off in his house? No. The distinction is a kamash milan, and presumably the owner is in the house and he knows that you're dropping it off. And the owner is not in the garden or the ruins and he doesn't know. But you're not required to inform the owner when you bring it to the place that's guarded. You're not required to tell the owner, I dropped it off. You don't need somebody to sign for it, so to speak. The Rebbe Lazar, and this is the teaching of Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar, and then in general, if you have something that belongs to somebody else and you bring it to them, you need the owner to have awareness of it. You need him, so to speak, to sign on delivery. Except if you're returning a lost object, like for example, if you have a pledge that you're returning, or a stolen object that you're returning, or a loan that you're returning, yeah, sure, then the owner needs to know. But if it's Hashavas Aved, if it's returning a lost object, the owner doesn't need to know. You don't need to have told the owner that you returned it. The Torah says, Hashev Tishivei, meaning you can do it in multiple ways. Now Abaye turns to his Rabbi Yosef. Remember, Rabbi Yosef says that if you find a lost object, you're like a shomer sachar. Abaye turns to his Rabbi Yosef. He says, "Va'ato tizbara." Aren't you of the opinion to shomer aveda kishomer chinam dami? Aren't you of the opinion? Don't you yourself agree that somebody who finds a lost object is like a shomer chinam? That somebody who finds a lost object is indeed like an unpaid watchman. Now you have to hold cup for this. It's a little tricky, but it's not so bad. You can get it. Now, Rabbi Chibar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, let's say Toin Tanas Kanaf Be'aveda. Let's say a person found a lost object. The person comes to him and says, you stole it. Now, a Geneva is theft. You stole it. Remember the distinction between Geneva, which is theft, where the person doesn't know that it was taken initially, and Gazela is where somebody takes it by force. So the Geneva is presumably, perhaps not necessarily by force, but the person doesn't know. It's a little unclear exactly how to define it, as you'll see from the Mahalach of our Gemara. But the person claims it was stolen from me. That's what he says. And why is he saying this? Rashi says he's trying to exempt himself because he's saying that since it was stolen from me, I don't have to pay, and so that presumably he's a shomer chinam, because that's why he's trying to exempt himself. And then they found out that actually he had it the whole time. So it's an unusual thing. Even though he didn't steal it, since he claimed it was stolen, he has to pay double. The penalty for theft is double. But the penalty for gazela, for stealing by force, is not double. That's just, you just have to pay it back. So atoin tan of ganav ba'aveda misham tashlumi kefil, he pays double. V'yisal that only makes sense that he pays double if it would be a shomer chinam. But if it would be a shomer sachar, like you say, Rabbi Yosef, if you say it's a shomer sachar, why would you say he has to pay double if he discovers his theft? From the very beginning, what a claim. He's claiming it was stolen. Okay, so pay. Because the Shomer Sachar has to pay back the amount. You can't claim it was stolen. So this doesn't disprove from this source, doesn't disprove from the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that indeed he's a shomer chinam. So Rabbi Yosef says, no, no, he says it was stolen, but he's saying but the reason why he's saying it was stolen, even though he's saying it was stolen, and he still wouldn't have to pay, even though he's a shomer sachar. Why? Because he's saying it was stolen by armed robbers, and armed robbers is an ones. it's a it's an unforeseeable thing, and so therefore the shomer sachar would be exempt. It's not theft, which the shomer sachar is liable. So the Gemara says, well, Amar lay list the mizuyan gazlan who. So Rabbi says to Rav Yosef, but if armed robbers, you shouldn't have to pay double because that's considered a gazlan, the robber, not the thief, and the robber you don't pay double for. He says, no, I say Shani Omer list the mizuyan. So Rav Yosef says, no, my argument is that these armed robbers, even though it's an armed robbery, I'm going to say, even the minter meinchi, when these armed robbers operate, they're operating with coverings over the masks, and so therefore we're going to consider them like a ganaf. Like basically the distinction between ganaf and gazlan is not force versus not force. It's but rather the distinction is whether or not you know who the person is or not, who stole it. And so therefore, in this case, since we don't know who it is, it's going to be considered like theft, but still the shomer sachar would be exempt because it's an onus, it's unforeseeable accident. And so therefore, since he made this claim, he now has to pay double because he would have been exempt. So now the Gemara is going to challenge Rav Yosef's idea that listim mizuyin is considered to be a ganef and not a gazlan. Eitzvei, so the Gemara challenges this idea from a brisa. But Rashi says, Masnisahi, this is a brisa, v'lo yadana ahechatanya. Rashi says, I don't know where this brisa is. Imagine Rashi says, I don't know. How many times in Shas does Rashi say, I don't know? We had this recently in the Rashi in the Chumash. Over 70 times in the Chumash, Rashi says, I don't know, or over 30 times in the Chumash, over 70 times in the Shas. Rashi was not afraid to say, I don't know. So anyway, going back to this source, it says, Ima Amris b'shomer chinam. If you would say, make such a claim by a shomer chinam. Now, again, Rashi says, I don't know the context of the brisa, so he doesn't know exactly what it's referring to. Tosfos wants to suggest it's referring to somebody who has a pledge, a deposit, a pawn. But anyway, we'll go with Rashi. Rashi says, I don't know the context. If you say this by a shomer chinam, shekei mishalim tashlume kefo, he can sometimes pay double because if he makes a claim it was stolen, it turns out he makes a claim that it was lost, and it turns out he's the one who stole it. Then under those circumstances, if he claims it was stolen, it turns out he was the one who stole it. Tomar b'shomer sachar she'ena b'shalim tishlim mekifa. Would you make such a claim by a shomer sachar who never actually can end up paying double? But if, according to you, Rav Yosef, if your claim is that the list of mizuyin, that these armed robbers are considered to be a ganef and not a gazlan, nimtza b'shomer sachar masham tishlim mekifa. We in fact do have a case where the shomer sachar would pay double, and so this price refutes your argument. We would have indeed a case where he pays double by the case where there were armed robbers. So Amarle. So Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, no, Bava Kamma. No, this is what the Bryce is saying. Lo im amris b'shomer chinam shekei misham tashlume kefo b'chol ta'anosav. He says, if you want to make such a claim by a shomer chinam, by an unpaid watchman, who anytime he claims it was theft, will end up having to pay double if it's found in his possession, would you really be able to make such an argument? Tomar b'shomer sachar, we make the same argument by a shomer sachar. She'enu b'shalim tashlumi koifel el b'toin tanas listim mizuyin. He only makes it in that one discrete case. So that's the way we read the brisa. Again, the Gemara challenges Rav Yosef, who says that the list of mizuyin is going to be considered like a ganef, that the armed robber is considered a thief, because it says in the brisa v'nish baro mace. The brisa is referring to a case of a shoel. You had a question, Jeff? Right. So Jeff is asking, why would the shomer sachar, the paid custodian, not have to pay double if he makes the claim by the unarmed? Because right away, he'd have to pay right away. So since he's paying right away, because if he says it was stolen just by an unarmed robber, he's responsible to pay the principal right away. In that case, he would, and then if it was discovered that he stole it, he wouldn't pay the double. That's that. Why? Because that's the halacha. Because it's not like he stole it then; he paid for it right away, I guess. So that's not like he stole it because he paid for it. Right, but he no, the twofold penalty is the penalty for stealing, not for making the false. Right, because the point is his false claim doesn't get him anything. Otherwise, he pays the value of it right away. So that's why. Okay, but I understand your point, but that's the distinction. If you're paying it, you're not going to end up paying double. Well, no. So that point is, but the distinction is the arm bandit, the person who was the paid watchman would be exempt from having to pay any principal. So therefore, he'd have to pay double. Okay. Well, not incentive, it's just the case. But okay, so now we're talking about a case of a borrower. Acevay, when we go over at 845 again, maybe it'll be even sharper. So Acevay, the Bryce, it says, Vinish borrow mace, if the animal, he borrows the animal and the animal breaks or dies, or the utensil breaks or dies, then we're going to say that the borrower is responsible to pay. I only know that he's exempt from paying, that he's responsible if it's broken or dies. How do I know if a borrower is also responsible for theft if it was stolen or lost? So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? We don't need the Gemara to tell us this. We don't need a pasuk. Amras kavachomer. We have a logical argument. Just like if he was a paid watchman and then the animal he borrowed died, or the car he borrowed broke down, he borrowed it, he's responsible. Chayev b'gneva shepater bo shvur musa. He's exempt if it broke or died, but he's responsible b'gneva v'aveda. But he's responsible for theft or loss. Shoal, a borrower shachayev b'shvur mesa. Din shachayev b'gneva v'aveda. For sure, a borrower is responsible for theft and loss because he's even responsible for if it breaks or dies. So we see from here that the shoal, that you can make a kavachomer argument that the shul for sure has to pay if it's stolen or lost. V'zeu kavachomer she'eno av tshuva. And this is such a strong kavachomer argument that there's no response to it. But we could have a response. If you want to say that the armed robbers are considered to be like a thief, then amayeno of tshuva, then we would have a very good response to this suggested kavachomer. You could break the kavachomer by saying mala shomer sachar. The shomer sachar has an advantage over the borrower, or a disadvantage over the borrower. Shekem misham tashlum kefo. Under certain circumstances, he has to pay double, whereas the borrower never would have to pay double. How? Betoin tanas list mizuyin. If the shomer sachar claimed it was stolen by armed robbers, and then it turns out that he stole it, he'd have to pay double. Whereas if the borrower claimed it was stolen by armed robbers, he would have to pay the principal right away. The Gemara says no, because Savar Aitana, and this is a little bit what Jeff was getting at. It was a little bit. He says the author of that Tana is on the position Karna below Shvua, that having to pay the principal back right away without even taking an oath is a difa mikvela b'shvua. It's actually a worse punishment than having to pay double, having to pay back double only after he swore falsely. So the Gemara says, okay, let's again try to prove this case. Leima Messiah. Let's again, but this time we're going to bring a proof for Rav Yosef against Rabbah, and Rav Yosef's argument is that a list of Mizuyin is considered to be a thief. So Hasochar para mechavero. So it says in the Bryce, if somebody rents a cow from its friend, Benignava, and the cow is stolen. The Amar Hala, and the other one says, you know what, it was stolen, and the person who rents it says, Hareini Mishalim ve'ini nishba. Even though I could swear, because I'm a renter, and I could swear that it was stolen and I wouldn't have to pay, because there's going to be an argument, what's a renter like? Is a renter like an unpaid watchman or a paid watchman? So according to this position, I could swear that it was stolen, and then I'd be exempt from paying, but I'm not going to swear, so I'll pay, and I won't swear. Hareini Mishalim ve'ini nishba. And afterwards, Nimtza Ganav, afterwards we discover the thief. Mishalim Tashlume Kefo Asochar. We're going to have to pay double payment to the renter. So basically, from the fact that you have to pay double rent, you have to pay the double payment to the renter. Savrua, Rabbi Yehuda. So the author, the Chachamim who wanted to bring a proof for this price that it's like Rabbi Yehuda, they thought that this price was like the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says Sochar no say Sachar Dami, that the renter is like the person who's getting paid, who's typically required to pay for theft. But in this case, but from the fact that he says, in this case, I could pay and I'm not going to take an oath, that he could have exempted himself with an oath. Well, how could a Shomer Sachar ever exempt himself with an oath? He could go into Tayin Tanis Listim Mizuyin, only in the case where he claimed it was stolen by armed robbers. Vikutani, and then it says in the Brisa, in this case, you pay back double to the renter. Shmami no Listim Mizuyin Ganavu. Isn't this a proof that the list of Mizuyin, like Rav Yosef, is a robber, and therefore you'd have to pay back double in this case? So the Gemara says, no, Amri, mi savris Rabbi Yehuda. No, you thought that this price was like Rabbi Yehuda, who says Sochar Kanose Sachar Dami, who says that the renter is like the guy who's paid. Dilmak Rabbi Meir Svirle. No, the other way to look at it is that he's like Rabbi Meir, who says Somer Kashomer Chinam Dami. He's like the unpaid watchman. And so therefore, that's why he says I could have been exempt, but I don't want to do it. And it's nothing to do with Listim Mizuyin. It's a regular ganaf. Or he buys same Vitani. No, or else we could read it like Rabbi Baravua switched the price and he taught Sochar Ketza Meshalim. How does the Sochar pay? Rabbi Meir says Kishomer Sachar. Rabbi Yehuda says Kishomer Chinim. Okay, we just switched the positions, but basically switch the names that are basically the exact same thing. Rabbi Zera says no. Hacham Mayaskinim. We're talking about something else. Betoing Tanas Listim Mizuyin. He claims. The renter claims that it was armed robbers, v'nimtza, and then the person where we discover was some she'enim mizuyim. We discover they weren't robbed, and so therefore he has to pay double because since it was just a regular theft, and so therefore he didn't swear properly. Therefore he has to he gets the double amount. Okay, we'll stop the recording here, and we'll go upstairs to daven and shacharis at this time, and God willing, we'll repeat this.